People are starting. Okay, John.
How you doing?
Good. How are you? Elizabeth, that probably says it's recording now. All right, North Syracuse, Frank Sadowski.
Hi, Frank.
Yeah. Check out eriecanal.org, everyone online and in person. Yep. Did you just click OK though? Like, got it.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Oh no, everyone's getting this thing. Oh, no, that's not what I wanted to hide. Sorry, folks. So I pay the big bucks stuff. All right, well, I think we've got much of our audience online has arrived and in person as well. Just 1 second. Luckily, if it's not recording, you just get to hear me talk. So, all right, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Derek Pratt. I'm Director of Education and Public Programming here at the Erie Canal Museum. Thank you very much for joining us today. The impact of the Erie Canal has been immense, socially, economically, politically, and many people, however, think that the Erie Canal is a thing of the past, a 19th century waterway. But through the 20th and into the 21st century, the New York State canal system has continued to go strong with the modern barge canal system. Today, we are happy to be looking at the history of one of the boats that plied that canal system's waters for nearly 100 years, the Peck and Paw. Now, before we get to this incredible boat, I just want to let you know about a few upcoming events here at the Erie Canal Museum. Our next lunchtime lecture will be on February 22nd and will feature Dr. Milton Cernett. He will be discussing the work of abolitionist Beriah Green and the Revolutionary Oneida Institute, which was located just off of the Erie Canal in Whitesboro, New York. Also in February, we'll have our next Deeper Dive lecture on February 8th at 6 p.m. We'll be screening WMHT, the Capital Region's PBS affiliates, new 45-minute documentary, Reframing an Empire, looking at the artist Thomas Cole and the Hudson River School, followed by a roundtable discussion with producers from the film and Renee Berry, who is featured in the documentary regarding Cole's relationship to the canal, and who many of you may know was our research fellow here at the museum from 2021 to 2023. Both lunchtime lectures and deeper dives occur monthly and are offered both virtually and in person. Consider signing up for an annual pass for both series, so you'll never miss a talk here at the Erie Canal Museum, and it'll streamline the whole process for you too. But now, on to today's event. We are proud to welcome Craig Williams, who serves on the board of the Canal Society of New York State and speaks regularly on a variety of Erie Canal topics. He retired as a senior historian at the New York State Museum after more than 30 years of service, and he is also a former curator here at the Erie Canal Museum. So welcome, Craig. Take it away.
Thanks, Derek. Let me know if my voice is coming through okay. Sound okay? And as Derek pointed out, I was a curator at the State Museum for 30 plus years from 1983 till 2014. And just to be honest with you, I was very involved with the Peck and Paw. So everything you hear is through the eyes of Craig Williams. So it's incredibly biased. Okay. But I have a feeling that bias is shared by many of the people in this room right now. So the Canal Society has been around since 1956, and many of us know it through, let's see, it's not going. I'm technologically challenged. So the society operates a facility on the New York State Thruway between Rochester and Syracuse, the Port Byron, the Heritage Park, where we have our own dedicated exit ramp on the Thruway. So in this past year, we had visitors from every state in the nation and over 50 countries. I dare say we are the biggest audience gatherer for canal stuff wherever. The centerpiece of the park is the 1850s era Lock 52. And I mentioned that, and I could give a whole talk just on that, because it's the authentic lock. So often, and I volunteer there, the question we get is, where did you move the lock from? How much did it cost to replicate this lock? You know, how did you get the stone carved? And we have a hard time convincing people of the authenticity of the site. We're so used to, I'm going to put my foot in my mouth, the Disneyland approach of replicas and the like. There is definitely a place for those, and I'll explain that in just a moment. But I still say, and it could just be, again, my bias as a curator, that authenticity counts. You know, I can remember, I'm digressing. One of my jobs at the State Museum was to photograph a book belonged to George Washington. And I still get shivers just knowing, holding that book. So it was the authentic book. Never mind. Okay. The other place we have in Port Byron, brand new, is the Samuel Center. One of our volunteers purchased the former Catholic Church in Port Byron for us. And we're in the process of converting that to more programming space and an archive and library, right, Amy? Yes. Amy Flanagan is helping with that. So if you'd like to know more about the Canal Society, there's our website. Operators are standing by for membership. We got great visibility this past fall on one of our efforts to save a boat, the Lois McClure. The Lois is a replica boat. It's based on incredibly sound documentation that was obtained by investigating underwater wrecks on Lake Champlain. So it may not be the authentic thing, but it's as close to that as you can get. It's even the timber construction is the same. It belonged to the Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, and many of you probably have seen it on New York State waterways. The last big effort was the 2018 Corning glass barge, where it accompanied it through the system. The Lake Champlain Maritime Museum, their direction changed, and they decided they were going to cut the boat up. So we don't intend right now to keep it on the water. Maybe, it depends. But our goal is to have it placed at the Heritage Park in Port Byron, where people can kind of reach up and actually see what a canal boat in the mid-19th century looked like. Again, I mentioned the authenticity question. The other question we get a lot at the park is, how big were these boats? And people don't have a concept of how big those boats were. So we're hoping that'll address that change. We also, through our archives and library, and a very aggressive membership dedicated to canal stuff, we put out a journal, Bottoming Out. This one was particularly dedicated to the day Peck and Paw, of which you're going to hear more of. And I always liked this picture. I know that person who's now 20 something. But if you'd like to actually see that issue, there is a Facebook group, public group, Friends of the Day Peck and Paw. And there's a link to download a free PDF of that. So I encourage you to do that. We put as much into that as possible. I actually have an issue there. Okay, so the day Peck and Paw. You'll get the background to this image later in the program if I don't keep digressing. So on the right, we have the late Bob Brown. He was the section superintendent for the canal in this region. The Peckinpaugh was very much of his day-to-day life, since the Peckinpaugh in that period operated between Oswego and Rome. He would know that the Peckinpaugh, at that time, it was hauling dry cement from Canada to silos in Rome. And it basically opened up the canal in the season and closed it. So Bob would regularly accommodate whatever the Peckinpaugh needed, because it was basically the last commercial vessel on the system. And I'll go into that in a little bit. And I'll just quickly mention Liz Beebe and Dave Beebe. So they're standing on the deck of the Peckinpaugh. In the bottom left is Tom Grasso. He was the head of the Canal Society and also a strong promoter of the Peckinpaugh. Bill and Sue, is that correct? Yes. And we're all extremely pleased and proud on that we did the impossible to save this boat. And it actually looks pretty good. So the story for my involvement, well, actually, goes back to the 70s. As a kid, I remember the Peckinpaugh going up and through the system, and I dare say many people in this room remember that as well. It had been doing that since that cement job, probably since the 60s, but it had been on the waterway long before that. In fact, okay, this is the one takeaway point. It was the first vessel specifically designed for the barge canal. And I'll probably repeat that a couple times. When we at the State Museum learned that it was going to have its last commercial voyage in 1994, the museum realized we had to document that. Certainly commercial traffic on the canal had lessened, and the Peckinpaugh, with its great legacy, was a true example of that. So in 1994, we put a film crew on and followed it. The video that you saw at the beginning is part of that. So, and we posted a lot of that. We became known about the Peckinpaugh. In 2005, in April of 2005, I got a call from, you're seeing the world through Craig. Okay, remember that. I got a call from the Historical Society in Erie, Pennsylvania. And the curator there said, they're about to send the Peckinpaugh to the Canadian scrapyard. And the curator there said, we know the State Museum was very interested in the boat. And would you be interested in, for instance, this is a bulkhead door. And decades ago, one of the crew painted it with the Peckinpaugh. Would we be interested in maybe the signboard, the store, the wheel? I remember thinking immediately, going, geez, can't we do better than that? Nonetheless, the prospect of acquiring a boat that's 240 plus feet long was intimidating. Nonetheless, several things happened. Indeed, the week after I got that phone call, the Canal Society was having one of its 2 study tours. I think it was up in Glens Falls. And Liz Beebe, remember Liz Beebe, was attending it, and I was giving the orientation, but I made a footnote at the end because many of us knew the Peckinpaugh, and I wanted everybody to know that really sad, but it was gonna probably head to the scrapyard. So Liz came up and said, well, how much would it cost? And I mean, I've known Liz for a long time. I said, well, geez, it could be, I won't even mention the number. Out of the universe. And Liz looked at me painfully, looked at me and wrote out a check for that amount. Which with that, it was extraordinary. Liz and Dave were passionate followers of the Peckinpaugh. So with that in hand, the State Museum then worked closely with the Erie Canalway National Heritage Corridor, the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation, and the Canal Corp. It was a great partnership. Everybody acknowledged that, as I have said in talks before, if the canal was on fire and everybody was safe, you're running back into the canal to save something, this would be what you would go in to save. I mean, it was that important to the legacy of the canal. I have to admit, though, when we went out to Erie, it looked much different than we all remembered back in 1994. Yeah. Do you see the trees in they're actually growing out of the boat. So we swallowed hard. And again, thanks to the Canal Corp and, all those other partners, we eventually made it look like this. So in 2009, it was a flagship for the Bicentennial, and traveled, and I'll talk more about this in a moment, along New York State waterways as a floating exhibit platform. It looks really nice there. Under its own power. Okay, maybe I said I'm joking for this. It's the first boat specifically designed for the barge canal. Okay, so if you walk around here, it was a towpath canal. And, in a sense, they were their own motorized vessels, if you count the mules or horses that towed them. But with the barge canal, that was no longer an option. They did have tugboats back then, but the goal of the barge canal was to do away with the towpath era. And here we are in Durhamville, changing teams. So Lock 17 in Little Falls, a classic image representing the new barge canal. In fact, this image was taken by the state purposely to show that. So now things were done by tow. Locks were built out of concrete, electric power, all of that. And the locks were obviously of much bigger dimensions. Keep in mind that it's the lock that determines the size of the boat. You build a boat bigger than the lock, it's going to be an issue. McDougall, a legendary boat builder in the Great Lakes, recognized the potential of the new barge canal system. Now, in the towpath era, just a little bit of history, what happened is that freighters, schooners would bring material to Buffalo, where it would be offloaded onto canal boats and then taken to New York. With the barge canal, you now had a better option of dispensing with Buffalo. I hate to say that. I mean, who wants to? I hope there's no Buffalo football. Never mind. The reason Buffalo has silos, okay, is because that was the transshipment point. But McDougall recognized that, we could make a boat that could accommodate the canal and also be seagoing. So in 1915, he patents this model, this boat, which looks very similar to the Peck and Paw. So this is 1915. In 1921, he actually builds it. This is the first of basically a half dozen nearly identical motor ships, boats that had their own power, cargo area, that could move on their own through the system. Great Lakes. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. And when it arrives in Buffalo in 1921, it does so with great fanfare. The state is incredibly hyped to document its voyage. This is the boat that everybody was looking for that would make the best use. Now, going back to history, we know the barge canal was finished in 1918. So why is this 1921? Okay, a telegram to the canal offices announcing the arrival of the ILI, the Interwaterways Line 101, the first boat coming to Buffalo. And again, they're getting ready to document the voyage. The excitement was palpable, and throughout its trip, it was photographed extensively. But why 1921? So World War I, okay, and the state pushed through the completion of the barge canal in 1918, though there were still some loose ends. At the same time, the federal government took control of the system. It took control of all the transportation systems in the country. Some would note that the people in charge were railroad officials, so they were no friends of the canal. I'm, again, biased on that. But yeah, so we have troops stationed at the locks. It's not until 1921 that the federal government turns the canal back over to New York State. So if you were a commercial vendor, that would open the door to, okay, I think it's safe to get back in the water, if you will. So one of the comments, it comes into Buffalo. People are so impressed. One of the newspaper accounts, thank you, Sue and Bill Orzel, for this. The new motor ship proved a revelation to local marine men, all of whom pronounced her a departure in canal craft. Yes, she is built as staunchly as any of the smaller type of steel steamers turned out for the government during the war. The feds had built a number of craft out of steel and actually out of concrete to help with the war effort. And she is equipped with every modern convenience, both for freight carrying, navigating, and crew accommodations. In the latter respect, the boat surprised Buffalonians who went aboard her, again, 1921. The deck crews and quarters, including the masters, are forward and the engineers are aft, the way it is today. These quarters are all roomy. I guess I have a different perspective of roomy, and well ventilated. That was true. And they have shower baths. Yes, I experienced those shower baths. They're still there. She is a mighty good little seaboat and goes along nicely at 8 miles an hour. I don't know that we ever got up to 8 miles an hour, said the captain. There is nothing lacking, and there is no doubt in my mind that she will negotiate the canal in splendid style. And she did so up until 1994. So again, the state is documenting the boat on this maiden voyage. You see the ILI 101. And when it arrives in Albany, again, with great fanfare. This is at the Albany terminal. The state had erected, as part of the barge canal, a number of places along the system where people could load and offload goods. This site is now the Corning Preserve. So 787 kind of goes right through them. That building, though, by the way, is still sort of around. It's one of the maintenance shops at Fonda, New York. Okay, so the Peckinpaugh has a long career. It goes to Cuba. It moves sugar. It has compartmentalized cargo bays, so it could carry a diverse amount of stuff. During World War II, so here it's carrying newspaper print to New York City, again, using inland waterways to avoid submarines out on the Atlantic. That said, I also know that it was out, there's a whole part of the Peck and Paw story, serving vessels out on the Atlantic. When I interviewed the crew in 1994, they didn't remember, but they did remember that they spoke to a former crew member who was on the boat during the war, and the fear that everybody had when a torpedo was launched to the boat, and they watched it just sail right under, because as a canal craft, it could only have so much depth, and it survived. After the war, it went to a shipyard in Brooklyn, and I'll show you this in a moment. It got such heavy use in the war that the midships were basically cut out and replaced, which effectively saved the boat. It survives. The whole fleet of other motor ships, however, did not survive. So if you were standing on the banks of the barge canal, say in 1936, okay, I digress for a moment. When we were bringing the boat across in 2005, I was doing the chase car, and I forget where it was, near Medina or something. And I pull up waiting for the boat to come to bring supplies. And there's this older person. I don't use the word elderly anymore. This older person, and he's there in a, a lounge chair waiting for the Peckinpaugh to come. And I went over and talked with him, and I asked him what he was doing. Well, he was there to see the Peckinpaugh. He remembered when it last came through this part of Western New York. And I puzzled, and I thought, it hasn't been through here. And he said, since 1936. Okay, but as a kid, he remembered it, and he just desperately wanted to see it again. So if you, again, had been standing on the banks of the canal in the 1930s, you probably would have seen over 100 of these motor ships. It would have been the standard image of the canal. Vessels that had huge cargo capacity and were self-propelled. Some of them got to be bigger than the Peckinpaugh. The upper right, the Robert Barnes Spirits, was a sibling vessel to the Peckinpaugh. Most of these get lost during the war when the government takes them over, either sunk or whatever. The Peckinpaugh, those survived. It doesn't get the name Peckinpaugh, by the way, until like the 1950s or 60s. And if I have time, I'll tell you how that happened. So a classic image of the Richard J. Barnes. It assumed that name in the 1930s, replacing the ILI 101, which admittedly is not the classiest name. Here it's tied up below Lock 2 in Waterford. And off to the left is the other classic vessel of the canal system that many of us are still trying to save, the tug Urger. Say again? Oh, yeah, sorry. But yeah. And again, the state continues to use the Peckinpaugh as the flagship for publicity. So in 1963, having just undergone a refurbishment, they photograph it going through the Oswego Canal. Now it's carrying cement. But they're using this picture to highlight the finishing of what was called the 1935 improvement, the kind of last hurrah for the current system. The feds underwrote the cost of raising the bridges and deepening the channel for the section between Waterford and Oswego. So they're using the Peckinpaugh to demonstrate we're up and running. And in 1994, it finishes its career as a cement bulk carrier. Again, it's bringing dry cement from Canada to the silos in Rome. It loses that contract, not because it didn't do a good job. Effectively, that boat carried as much as, okay, it's just that the mindset changed. I mean, who wants to move stuff by water anymore? Personal attitudes have a lot to do with this. I digress. So in 1994, we had our film crew and photographers on board and tried to document, we did document day-to-day life on the boat. Did interviews. Bill and Sue, you were on, so you remember. Oh, I might note, you see the person in the blue t-shirt? That's Jim Brennan. So make a mental note of that. He was the engineer on the Peckinpaugh. As many of you have mentioned when you came in here today, you all remember the Peckinpaugh. So on this last voyage, at every lock, people came down to say bon voyage. You know, it was the closing of a chapter in canal history. So here, the folks in Phoenix are coming out with balloons and all sorts of stuff to, you know, thank the crew. There are media photographers on board. Really an event. We didn't expect that that was going to be the end of its career. In any event, it headed back to its home port, as it says on the stern here, Erie, Pennsylvania. Okay, so 2005. I told you about the phone call, right? Remember, we could do better than that. One thing leads to another. Thank you, Liz Beebe. And we assemble a crew, Canal Corps personnel, State Museum personnel, Erie Canalway personnel. We got the boat serviceable enough to be towed across Lake Erie. And here, after a very long day, we're coming into Buffalo. We only did minimal work on it. We did cut the trees down. And you can see the New York State Museum banner. So at that time, the director of the museum made the statement, the Dave Peckinpaugh is an important artifact of the history of the canal, and we are honored to include it in the collections of the museum, the State Museum, and determined to make it available for future generations of New Yorkers. Even then, the hope was that the State Museum would take it out throughout New York State, that it would expand the programming horizon for the museum. So the accommodations weren't the best. We pulled it off. You can see one of the grain silos in Buffalo. In a sense, the Peck and Paw contributed to their abandonment because it could now take grain or whatever all the way to New York Harbor. Okay, the trip was not without incident. So here's Tonawanda. I was on shore, and you're seeing it through Craig's eyes. And I'm watching them come around the bend with my film crew. We actually have film of this. And I'm going, they're going way too fast. They're going way too fast. And I hear this incredible screeching sound as they get stuck under the bridge. Okay. We had all measured it. There are various accounts of what happened. In any event, it got stuck, but we didn't so much worry about getting stuck as we did about the fire that then broke out. So I'm standing on shore watching flames come up. It's stuck. All of a sudden, there's a forest of TV crews and Coast Guard people there. Never in my life have I so much wanted to run away. But I do go up to the crews and I say, that's my boat. And they wondered what the hell is going on. Well, and I said, well, we were trying to be careful about publicizing this because, we're not sure. But what we're trying to do is save this important vessel. And I still remember the reporters just ripping off their page about accident of the Tonawanda Bridge to talk about the Peck and Paw and the saving of the boat. So lots of interest. So the way we get unstuck, by the way, is the Peck and Paw is sort of like a submarine. It has its own ballast tanks to maximize its capacity. It's able to go up and down. So remember, the bridge heights are fixed on the canal. I mentioned the 35 improvement to 20 feet. On the western section, they stayed at 15. The Peck and Paw was designed for that 15. We had just miscalculated. We did get the fire out. It was in the pilot house. Yeah, it wasn't bad, but the billowing smoke certainly didn't create the positive attitude. So we get on our way past Tonawanda, and I know that looks like a case of Corona beer. And that's Tom Grasso and Dave Beebe up there. We're well behind schedule. We're trying to get to Lockport, but we get stuck. We didn't have enough supplies on the boat. So I'm sure Tom is just grabbing whatever carton he could find to put needed supplies in. Right? We get to Lockport, and then Society volunteers. We get there, in July. The other thing that's happening at this time, and again, thanks to the Office of Park Recreation and Historic Preservation, particularly Mark Peckham, who was in the State office at the time, we get the boat listed on the National Register of Historic Places in record time. So he couldn't do it until we were actually in New York State waters. So in July, we're in New York State waters. Within days, he gets it submitted. By the 1st of September, it's approved. I've worked with the State Preservation Office for 50 years, with them for 50 years. I've never seen an NR application go through so quickly. One of the reasons was that we were all looking forward to take advantage of some funding sources that OPRHP had, but only if you were on the National Register. So again, I give that example as a witness testimony to, there was great support. Everybody wanted this to happen. We had volunteers from the Canal Society go out weekly to work on the boat. And again, thanks to the Canal Corp, we borrowed one of their scows to paint it. People were there almost on a daily basis. I do remember going there one morning, and seeing the stern deep in the water and the bow way up. It had sprung a leak. That was another time when I thought, that's it. Opening up the engine room door and seeing the sheen of water contaminated with oil. Obviously, we couldn't pump that into the canal. I think it cost us $30,000 that day. But again, everybody stepped up to the plate. It was sad that it happened, but we overcame it. So volunteers are working on the boat, doing all the safety requirements. We meticulously bagged all the scrapings. Ugh, I can still smell that. So in late October, the canal had closed, and we're going to get underway to take it to Waterford. So it looks a little better now, right? As in 1921, with great fanfare. There were film crews, media, and on its own power, it goes into the flight of locks at Lockport. It was an exciting day. So that image of Bob Brown, David Liz Beebe, Tom Grasso, that's this day. We couldn't keep people away and trying to help. And again, the Canal Corp, they basically allocated their fleet to help make this happen. Lockport had not seen a vessel like this in decades. And it's important to see it, because you don't understand the locks until you see a boat that big go through it. I mean, we're so used to small pleasure boats going through. That's not what the canal was built for, necessarily. Okay. Remember Jim Brennan, the guy in the blue t-shirt? So turned out he lived not far from Lockport, and initially came on as a volunteer. He shook his head going, you know, you guys are nuts. He spent basically the next 2 years of his life helping us get the boat. We did eventually pay him to get it going again. Okay, so as we head east to Waterford, again, just like 1921, there's a whole crowd of interest in the boat. I don't know how they found out about it. So the image on the left, can you see on the counter, there's a picture of the Peck and Paw coming soon to Knowlesville, question mark. So Knowlesville has a lift bridge, and we were going to tie up briefly there because I was in the state van, I was going to bring supplies. So this store is right next to the bridge. And I go in and I'm grabbing cookies and, you know, donuts and, you know, healthy food. And I'm dressed with a tie, and I look like a bureaucrat. I was not looking like the people who usually went to that store. And they asked me, you know, what they saw the state vehicle, what was I doing? And I said, well, I'm with that. And I pointed to the picture of the Peck and Paw. And they said, is it coming? And I said, in 20 minutes. And the whole village of Knowlesville suddenly showed up. And they donated all the donuts and cookies. Okay, that's one example, but I'll give you one more example, but I could give many more. So in Little Falls, we had a glitch. We had run out of fuel. And we were reaching the end of the schedule. So I and others with vehicles scrounged around. We knew that there was a fuel truck somewhere in Little Falls. We had seen it earlier. So we actually stop it on the road, put our vehicle right in front of it, have it pull off. What is going on? And I go up to the guy and I said, look, I know this breaks every rule, but we need diesel fuel and we need it right now. And he said, are you with that boat? And yeah. Does he look like he's disagreeing with us? So that happened repeatedly. So, there's something about a boat on the water that just, whatever your age, remember that picture of bottoming out with the kid? I mean, you get it right away. Middleport, New York. Thankfully, the Canal Corp is helping us get it through. And you see the close fit under the bridge. Again, it's designed to just fit. Near Lyons, New York, helping with supplies. And we make it to Waterford, again, with great fanfare in 2005. We get that grant that I mentioned from OPRHP. That was like $300,000. And I know that seems like a lot of money, but it was a drop in the bucket of what was needed. But it does, now that we're in Waterford, it does give us an opportunity to study the boat more thoroughly. So I mentioned McDougall, but the person who actually builds the boat is Julius Barnes. His grandson is right there. Okay. Richard J. Barnes, who I think is still alive, an attorney in Washington. Maybe he has passed. So Richard Barnes would be Alden's cousin. Julius named his fleet of boats after the kids with some changes. So you can see the plaque there credits the Todd shipyard. I mentioned that after the war, the midships were replaced. So Alden is telling me about how that happened and what it meant. You can still see Richard J. Barnes. Can you see that? Okay. And indeed, there's one or two places on the boat where you can actually see ILI 101. Now, also note that it's riveted. That's the original bow. The midships are all steel welded. Thankfully so. So there's Alden on one of the other Barnes boats, the one that was named after him. Makes sense. Again, almost an exact copy of the Peckinpaugh. None of them survive. One of them, and I note that Will Van Dorp, I think, is listening in on this. One of them is sunk in the Arthur Kill down in New York Harbor. Doesn't look very good. So we get the funding. We're trying to get as much free support, if you will, to help work on it. And the first thing to do is the cargo hold, which is over 140 feet long by maybe 40 feet wide. Later, we did have kids play baseball in the cargo hold, but it still had lots of dry cement. We needed to get rid of that. There was a lot. So part of my job was to work with other state agencies. So over the years, I did time in many of the state correctional facilities. That may not sound right, but they knew me, and I reached out to them for a work team from Mount McGregor, and we would bring these guys down daily to help. These guys were near release. I won't go into the story, but we actually then employed some of them, and it made all the difference in their lives. The smiles aren't forced. What really makes the difference in 2009, well, we had tried earlier. There was a program within the State Department of Transportation called Transportation Enhancement Program, TEP. a certain percentage of federal highway monies had to be allocated to cultural improvements in New York State. We had tried one year and it didn't happen. It was one of those cases I was ready to just abandon the whole thing. The DOT guys, though, were incredibly reassuring. You got to try again. They really got it. They came out to the boat repeatedly going, no, this is exactly what we want. And I'm paraphrasing, and please don't repeat this. But, you know, they would get applications for like picnic tables for Podunk, New York. And I live near Podunk, New York. They wanted something that would be statewide. And this was the only candidate. So the application goes in asking for $3.2 million, of which the state ed department had to chip in 20%. And I had no clue how I was going to come up with that 20%. So what happens in 2008, 2009? We have a recession, and we have the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act. So I remember the call from Washington that day going, we've just determined that you're a shovel-ready project. And we looked at, you know, you're going to employ boiler makers, metal workers, you know, steel people. We're going to move you into ERA funding, but only if you let us pay the entire cost of the whole project. And I'm sitting there going, what? He said, you have to understand you can't contribute any of that 20%. We have to cover it completely. And I thought, okay. So not that was not without paperwork, but within weeks, we had a whole crew at the Waterford dry docks. A lot of them out of work. And I'm sure we kept at least 2 companies in business locally, replacing the hull that had rotted away. It was a huge undertaking. And you get a sense of it here. None of this would have been possible without the help of the New York State Canal Corporation. Again, a great testimony witness to everybody's commitment to making this happen. What we had in mind as kind of the inaugural trip was that Bicentennial voyage, that if we could get everything done, including handicap access into the cargo hold and all that, we could get out on the water. The engines, the Detroit 6110s, we got those working. It was amazing. Repaired the ballast system. Yeah, you know, part of the boat had rotted. Fixed all that. And thanks to the canalway, we started getting interpretive signage in the cargo hold. That's Jim Brennan again. When those engines are on, you know it. And so soon we have people on board. That cargo hold, as is now, is about 140. Okay. So you're actually looking at 1/2 of the cargo hold there. I might add that given effort, you could make that bigger, even as is. Remember the Lois McClure? Okay, so you could put the Lois McClure in that cargo hold and have room to spare. Okay. Not that we would ever do that. I can't imagine getting it through. Never mind. Okay, so on its own power, we take it up. Oh, I shouldn't have. We weren't supposed to go out of state waters, so ignore this. I'm sure the limitations are beyond, but we weren't supposed to go out of state. On our own power, we go up to the north of Lake Champlain, and all the way we tie up alongside the carrier Intrepid. How great was that? Obviously, we looked smaller than the carrier Intrepid, but nonetheless, we had a great visitation. The boat was in great shape, and having it go through New York Harbor, a lot of people made this happen. You know, Duncan Hay from the Canalway, John Callahan from the Canal Corp. You know, I could go on. Okay, and then it ends. Like with the Lois McClure, there's a change in administration. And after that, the State Museum decides, nah, maybe this wasn't a good idea. Okay, we have just effectively put in $4 million of your money, okay, to enable a classroom to go throughout New York State waterways. How great is that? It's still there. So the Canal Society went to kind of pay homage to it just last fall. Boats like this, you have to paint on a daily basis. So I know a lot of people look at it and, oh, it's a rusty bolt. You know, we've painted it many times. That's easily fixable. The mechanical systems, at least when I left, were still okay. And regardless, it could still be an incredible classroom to go across New York State. We were reminded of that when we were rescuing the McClure. You can see the comparison of it as we're trying to get the McClure, which is now tied up on Cayuga Lake for the winter. Okay, I told you all that to tell you this story. Okay, so we're in the bicentennial era of the Erie Canal. It's been 200 years. Okay, I'm going to be cynical and crass. What has been your favorite bicentennial event so far? I mean, I can name some. The State Museum did do a wonderful exhibit on the Erie Canal. That was very good. The Buffalo Maritime Museum is doing a replica Seneca Chief, which will hopefully be on the waterway soon. Right, okay. I can't afford, yeah, I can't afford to go to that. So, okay. Yeah, I shouldn't joke like this. I'm old enough to remember when this would be a hallmark in New York State. And what we have, well, for instance, you know, when they complete the canal in 1825, there's the Wedding of the Waters. Okay. So they do try to honor the centennial of the exhibit. And again, I shouldn't go there. The state couldn't get its act together. So it's not until 1926 that they actually celebrate the 1825 event. And this time they do it by plane, go figure, exchanging containers of water. I guess that worked. I mean, they justified it that, well, 1826 was really the first full season of traffic. This just didn't get its act together. So they did a lot of publicity. You can see the 1926 date. I would have been embarrassed. I have a feeling it's happening again. They issued little medallions for everybody. There's Al Smith. Okay, but a better example is 1967. So I remember 1967, and there was a lot of educational effort that went into marking, you know, the 150th anniversary of the first digging. So there were postage stamps. The Canal Society was very active with the New York State Council on the Arts to retrofit one of the state's quarter boats. Again, it wasn't the Canal Corp then, it was Waterways, but the state was very committed to doing something throughout the system. It helped them also by bringing people down to the waterfront. 1967, the canal was very different. Okay, it was still very much an industrial set. So for the state to actually encourage people to come down, you know, Pittsford didn't look like Pittsford does today. So it took a bit of courage to say, okay, let's all come down to the waterfront. The Erie made, again, this refurbished quarter boat. Those images are all from the Canal Society. Again, we worked with the Council on the Arts. It created a baseline of interpretation. So we would pull this up to Seneca Falls or Waterford or Syracuse Terminal, and it would, you know, give the basic knowledge for everybody. And then the local groups could add their story. So in Rome, it gave the impetus to, okay, Rome can now celebrate its story because we have this kind of flagship here that's going to draw attention. So they have the band there and everything. A better example in 1976, obviously that's the bicentennial of the nation. Again, the Canal Corp waterways. And in this case, the New York State Museum and the Council on the Arts, they take over a railroad barge, much bigger. And it was just filled with displays inside and traveled throughout the system. So, in that one season, nearly 1 million people got on board. Again, this was a time when, 1976, maybe you didn't want to go down to the canal. It was still a very industrial site. One of my mantras, and it's not, I didn't invent this term, one water, that what New York State is blessed with is one water, that you could put your canoe into Inner Harbor and go anywhere in the world. It would take some time, but you can go throughout most of New York State. I think it still holds true that about 80% of the New York State population, maybe even more now, lives in a short car ride from the canal. Okay, so if we're doing the bicentennial, okay, that's 200 years. And Derek, I'm just going to correct you. The Peckinpaugh has been around for over 100 years. Okay, I'm joking about that. Okay, but for more than half of the bicentennial period, the Peckinpaugh has been a part of that story. Okay, and it's the authentic vessel. It could do it again. Unfortunately, it's probably going to head to the scrapyard. Not the best note. Okay, questions? I'm sorry. What can we do? Local legislators. That's what made the difference back in 2005. We had a whole cadre of upstate legislators who thought this is a great idea. The issue is, and I'm going to get into the weeds here, insurance. Okay, so the state has committed itself that it no longer wants to own the boat. Unfortunately, insurance makes it almost impossible for a private group to own the boat. So the Lowe's McClure, okay, so we have it tied up in a marina in Hugo, New York. So the insurance, just the liability insurance, not property insurance, not any of that, just maritime liability insurance for November to April. So not even hardly half a year, $10,000. Okay, the insurance cost for the Peckinpaugh, if you actually took it out, privately owned, would be $100,000 a year. The state is self-insured. Those costs, I'm exaggerating, it's basically decimal dust. So could something happen where the state still owns it and a group of nonprofits get together? I think that's doable. Time is running out. It could well be 2026 before we pull this off, but we got to try. I mean, we tried in 2005, did the impossible. So yeah. Yeah, a lot of investment. Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah. The state is committing a lot for the best reasons to the Buffalo Maritime Museum for the replica Seneca Chief. And I don't mean to disparage that at all. It's a wonderful thing. Well, it sort of was. But the Seneca Chief is, a little over 80 feet long. You might be able to fit a small school group on board if you can do that at all due to insurance reasons. The Peck and Paw could do it all. I guess my vision would be the McClure, the Seneca Chief, the Peck and Paw, all out on the waterway in 2025. If I was a business owner in Lockport or Medina or Canajoharie, the cachet of the Bicentennial of the Erie Canal carries some weight. I mean, look at what's going on with the April 8th eclipse. I mean, that's a huge marketing event out in Western New York. The Bicentennial of the Erie Canal can at least be that. So, yeah.
Well, Oswego could be part of the story.
Oswego, yeah. There's a lot of interest. I don't repeat this outside this office. The Peck and Paw used to regularly winter in Utica Harbor. Utica Harbor is being redeveloped. I think to preserve the legacy of that industrial use, the Peck and Paw could be permanently moored there. Yeah, maybe never travel the water again, turned it into a restaurant, but at least it would represent, over 100 years of Erie Canal history. So that was one idea, but I'm not picking on Utica. Manton Shipyard in Waterford, New York. There's efforts to redevelop that site. That's a possibility. But the key would be to have the state still own it. I can vouch for the fact that they do not want to own it. So.
And who exactly is that? I'm sorry, Donald.
Huh.
Exactly who within the state makes that decision? It's the New York State now.
No, the boat is technically owned by the New York State Museum, which is within the state education department. So what will happen, and the museum has been going through, crossing the T's, dotting the I's, and there's been some delays. It was actually incorporated into their collection. So there are certain legal requirements that they have to abide by. And it's on the National Register. So the State Historic Preservation Office has been trying to be careful about this. So they postponed what was to happen last fall, which was to turn it over to the Office of General Services and put it up on the auction block. Its value as scrap far exceeds its commercial use right now. So, yeah. It did almost get reefed off Long Island. You may remember a few years ago, the state took, Sue, you're nodding your head up and down, a number of our historic vessels to make underwater preserves for underwater divers off Long Island. So we lost the Reliable, we lost the Ward's Island, some of our most classic boats. Don't get me started. I'll get in trouble for what I just said. So, other questions? Oh, Derek.
We have a question for Frank, actually. Is there a draft, form letter that can be modified and be sent out to state representatives?
There isn't. That's a great idea, Frank. Thank you. I'll get something together. So, again, join the Friends of the Day Peck and Paw Facebook account. We'll try to post things on that. Thanks, Frank. Okay.
Thanks. But
I might add, Frank Sadowski runs the eriecanal.org website. Also, Tug 44, which are the go-to websites if you want to get an introduction to the canal. There is such a wealth on Frank's website. Whenever I get a question on the Erie Canal, the first doorway I ask people to go through is go check eriecanal.org, then come back. So, and he does that as a volunteer. Sorry.
Good to know, since you're my guy. So it said the Peckinpaugh is designed as a seagoing vessel. And
Yeah.
That's just for kind of coastal transatlantic voyage insights.
Well, it went to Cuba. You know, and it went throughout. Did I talk about the whiskey? Did I mention that? Okay. Okay. Thank you, Sue and Bill Orzel. So in May 1935, this is after Prohibition gets put in the grave. The newspaper accounts a cargo of 900 tons of whiskey is being moved by canal from Peoria, Illinois to the Atlantic seaboard on the motor ship ILI 101. State canal officials reported yesterday. This is the first time it was said that canal cargoes have been loaded in the Mississippi Valley for shipment on the barge canal. So remember that one water statement? That extends to the Mississippi, Gulf of Mexico. But yeah, the Peck and Paw did go to Cuba on a regular basis. So, yeah.
So I have a question related to the Bicentennial.
Okay.
You know,
And I apologize if I sounded sarcastic.
so the question is, what can you do to kind of increase the excitement about this? Was there somebody that should be, you know, Parks Canada?
Oh, I know.
So passionate about their canals, and they advertise the loopers. And you mentioned Pittsburgh, which has done a wonderful job.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But towns across the board.
Yeah.
Who's got it?
I think the governor. Oh, yes. Okay. The question dealt with how can we stir more interest in marking the bicentennial of the Erie Canal? You know, kind of. You know, we've already missed several years. The governor in her State of the State a few weeks ago did announce a bicentennial commission, but I don't have any of the specifics on that. It's really late in the game. There are a number of local groups that are trying to fill that void. Okay, but we're all going to be reinventing the wheel at the local level. And wouldn't it be nice to have something like the Erie Maid, who could be the kind of anchor store to these communities going through the system? Certainly, it's a state responsibility. You know, I keep going back to local legislators. Okay. Yeah. Again, if I was a merchant in Pittsburgh, I would really want to hype the bicentennial. So, yeah. Okay, thanks.
Okay, Brad? Excellent.
I'm surely going to get punished for the things I said. Okay, thanks. All right. I didn't see any PL Corp people on the time.
No. How do I turn this off?
You can keep that. Sir.
There we go.